will be released.
Judge Deborah Nelson had made it clear that nobody was to make any sound as the verdict was announced, and indeed everyone followed that instruction to the letter. George Zimmerman barely showed any reaction, maybe the hint of a smile when they first said not guilty, but really stayed placid through all of that proceeding. Let me bring in Pete Schulte, law enforcement expert, a former police officer, a former prosecutor, right now a defense attorney. It's remarkable after such a long day of deliberations and so much speculation about what the jury might be thinking, which way it might go. What's your initial impression of all of this?
Well, Lisa, I'll tell you that I'm not surprised that the jury came back as not guilty this late, especially after the note they sent out earlier. It was clear very early on with that note that they weren't going to be considering second-degree murder anymore. Then it was going to come down to there's a paragraph in the jury charge that talks about self-defense. And in Florida and a lot of other states, once the issue of self-defense is raised, the burden of proof then shifts back to the state to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that self-defense was not justified the murder of Trayvon Martin. And that is almost an impossible burden. So from the legal community perspective, I think that we thought that this case was overcharged. The fact that the prosecution was asking for a lesser included, almost manslaughter, almost never happens. So this is not a big shock for the legal community, but I think, I could hear almost a pin drop in that courtroom when the judge released the verdict. So I can imagine things are going to be very interesting in Florida tonight.
And you would think that with so much right now, let me just reset what's happening in the courtroom. George Zimmerman is, surrounded by his attorneys. He's talking to a couple of the court officers because, again, as the judge said, he's going to be able to lose the GPS device now. He's going to be a completely free man again. It looks like he's gathering up some personal effects. His family is there. The defense attorneys are there. He's looking a little more relaxed. His wife is wiping away tears. Everyone's looking a little more relaxed. There are tears on a number of faces in the courtroom now. Now his mom is reaching out. George Zimmerman's mom and dad hugging him, holding his hands. They're smiling. Now you can see a little bit of the emotion start to flow after so much tension in the room before the verdict was announced after this 3-week trial. And as you say, such a charged atmosphere. Zimmerman now is still sort of talking to his attorneys. He's smiling a little, but it's still a relatively subdued reaction. And again, I think it's probably just taking some time for it all to sink in. But Pete, when you talk about the burden that the prosecutors had in this case, the overwhelming burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and it would seem, when you think about all the debate about was there really self-defense, when there's so much debate about something, that in and of itself would seem to raise reasonable doubt.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the jury charge, I have to tell you, was very complicated for that jury to follow along. But the most telling point of it is, like I said, it was on, not to be specific, I know we're on radio, but page 12, the very last paragraph, stated that if you do not believe beyond a reasonable doubt that George Zimmerman was acting in self-defense, or if you have a reasonable doubt thereof. I mean, think about that for a second. If you think that he could have, or maybe, or probably was using self-defense, that equals an acquittal. And that's the burden of proof we're talking about. Somehow the state of Florida, the prosecutors, had to overcome that burden of proof, saying that it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt that he did not use self-defense. And that